Thanks very much. So we'll have the other speaker is joining us by WebEx, and after that we'll have questions. So the next speaker is Wendy Craig. Dr. Craig is a professor and head of psychology at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. Her research focuses on healthy relationships, bullying and victimization, and knowledge mobilization. She will present on her recent research involving neuroimaging that is attempting to characterize the neural mechanisms associated with defending behavior in response to bullying interactions. Dr. Craig, thank you for joining us.
Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to present. I'm going to follow it probably very closely to where the last presenter left off by talking mostly about neuroimaging kinds of studies and the work that we've been recently doing. And as the last speaker summarized, there's been some work examining the neurocorrelates of acute social exclusion. And one of the main things that has come out of that is that there's this notion of this need to establish, whether physical and social pains share overlapping neural networks. And many of the studies have actually been done looking at it using the Cyberball paradigm, and there's a large range of examples. It's been done in adults and adolescents and healthy groups versus clinical patient groups. And generally, overall, what you find is that children, most of these populations respond to acute social rejection, whether they're witnessing it or experiencing it firsthand, and that corresponds to activity in the anterior cingulate cortex. And it depends on the population where exactly that activity is. And it also is correlated to anterior insula, along with other regions involved in emotional control and regulation. And so there seems to be some support for this notion that there's an overlap between social pain response and the physical pain response. And so that's where our work really started off. And we were really interested in looking at this, but we were interested in looking at it in different types of populations. So in our work, what we've done is we've selected out for kids who have a history of chronic victimization, that is that they've been victimized more than once a week for a period of over a year, and they do not bully others. We've selected a group of kids who have been intervening in bullying for over a year. So when they see bullying happen, they intervene in it, and we call those children defenders. They are also not victimized, and they are not bullied. And we've also looked at control children who say they don't intervene, are not victimized, and are not bullying others. And I think one of the things that we were really interested when we started this work was looking not only at the effects of the kids who are being victimized, but in general the effects of the kids who witness it, because in some early work we found that 85% of bullying episodes have peers witnessing it.
Wendy?
So that's why we included in particular the intervener group, because they were what we were considering to be active witnesses.
Wendy?
And in general, when we look at our study of about 8,000 kids, that's a nationally representative sample in Canada, what you find is on this graph, it shows
Wendy?
the different types.
Wendy,
Yeah?
we can't see your slides. Yeah? We can't see your slides.
Oh, okay. Let me go back. Sorry.
Can you tell her what she's supposed to do?
I'm going to the...
Well...
Okay, so here, okay.
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 Can you make it larger there so we can see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just going to... Can you see it now?
We can now see it. Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that. That was critical. So what you can see is, in general, this asks them how often a week that the children witness the different forms of bullying. So the most frequent one that they witness is verbal. The next is social bullying, and then you can see physical and electronic. And then the other three, religion or race, sexual, and disability, are about the content of the bullying that they may witness. So I just want to give you a sense of that the kids are witnessing a significant amount of bullying. And in our observation work, we find that bullying happens about once every 7.5 minutes through naturalistic observations on the playground in elementary school. So there's lots of opportunities to see it happening, and we were wondering what the effects were on the kids. So the research that I'm going to talk a little bit about from you is just that we're finishing right now. And we really wanted to delineate the neural correlates of social exclusion in peer victimized children, and also look at the neural correlates associated with pro-social behavior, that is, those who defend in response to these negative social interactions. And as it's been showed, we do a couple of tasks in the fMRI. One of them is the Cyberball Task. So here are 4 of my graduate students who have given me permission to show this. And basically, when the kids are in the fMRI, what they see is they are the participant, and there are different conditions. So in one condition, they're just watching the game happen, and they're not a participant. In another condition, they are actually playing the game, and they are actively excluded. So the ball gets thrown around, and as you can see, it never goes to player 4. The actual participant. And so this is probably the most ethical way that we can simulate one form of victimization. And going back to the previous slide, the second most frequent type of victimization that they witnessed was this social exclusion. So what do we find in our research? When you collapse across all of the groups, it's not surprising we replicate what you find when you compare the inclusion to the exclusion kinds of conditions. What you find is that these are the areas in which social exclusion is positively correlated, and it's through a multiple regression, and you find them across all 3 groups. So it replicates exactly what we have found or what has been reported before. So you find it in the anterior singular cortex as one of the areas which is related to affective pain. You find it in the precuneus, which is related to depression and pain. And you find it in the right inferior frontal, which is one of its functions is related to risk aversion. So basically, all kids, when they witness or when they experience social exclusion, have some type of a neural response in these 3 specific areas. But what we were really interested in is looking at, are the children who are victimized particularly at risk? Are they showing a greater response under these conditions? And just when we ran these regression results, we actually controlled for life adversity, so that we controlled for any early life stress like child maltreatment or hostile parenting, and these are the results that we got. And what you find here is that there are areas that are more active in the victimized group compared to the control group, and these areas are in the left hippocampus, the amygdala, and the right anterior singular cortex. And so basically what these areas relate to is, in general, we think about the hippocampus as being related to memory. And one of the next kinds of studies we're going to be doing is looking at the connectivity. But the story that we think is starting to emerge is that these kids who have a history being victimized by their peers may, when they experience the social exclusion task, what's happening is they might be evoking memories in which they have a sensitivity to being victimized in the past. And the activation in both of these were bilateral in all these 3 cases. So there might be in the next in the amygdala, it relates to emotional processing, and so particularly things related to fear and arousal. So one of the things that might be happening is they're sensitized to this victimization. It evokes emotional response of fear and arousal. And then the anterior cingulate cortex is related to risk aversion. And so that might also be being evoked in the inclusion task. So what we're really beginning to see in these children is that they have a heightened response in these specific types of areas that's greater than control kids, that's greater than our defenders, that correspond well to what we know about emotional regulation and memory related to being victimized, and that comes also from the maltreatment literature. We also have found some results that look a little different. The defenders are also having a heightened response when only compared to the peer group. And we're still trying to sort of figure out what exactly this response is, so that they tend, we actually have done another study to try and pull this apart, but it seems like this particular area of the brain is of interest to us to see, because we're really interested in looking at how they differ from, in this comparison, it was about them being excluded, but one of the functions they primarily do is they see it happening and then they activate it. So we need to sort of dig deeper to understand what that is. But the interesting thing is that they were also activated in many of the same areas related to emotional processing in the amygdala at a bilateral, similar to the kids who are victimized. But we still need to know more about these defenders and the potential negative effects. And actually in the next session I'll be talking about some of the negative or the costs associated with defending for these children. In our second study, we basically looked at this more in depth, and we found that there was greater activity in the posterior insular cortex of defenders during the exclusion. We also correlated it to some behavioral measures to understand it a bit more, and we found that there was a positive correlation between self-reported empathy. So the higher the empathy, the greater the activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, so that the more empathetic they were, the more that they were experiencing this social pain during the exclusion period of the fMRI task. We also found another positive correlation between self-reported emotional regulation, and I should have said this. They did a second task in the fMRI, which is the approach avoidance task, which is basically when you see a happy face, you're either given the cue to approach it or to avoid it. And, of course, our natural tendency is to approach happy faces, but there are also sort of negative emotion faces like anger, and you're given the same instructions. So under some conditions you approach, and under some conditions you avoid it. And what we found was that in that task there were some positive correlations between their emotional regulation and the activity in the distal prefrontal cortex of defenders. And we also found that same activity when we looked at it in the Cyberball Task. So one of the things that we're coming to understand is that these kids who are defending are also unique in terms of what might be happening in their brain, that they are responding with greater empathy, they're responding with higher levels of the pain response, but not as high as the kids who are victimized. And they're also showing some ability to emotionally regulate their behavior. So that might be what enables them to defend effectively. And so I think there are a couple of key messages that we seem to see that for defenders, there seems to be the self-report shows a greater empathy tendencies, and they display more neural evidence of empathetic processing when they witness the peer rejection. In other words, they're feeling the pain of others, so they're feeling the pain of the child being victimized, and they also might be more effective when they witness the rejection of others. So that it's really beginning to suggest that there's something unique going on in that particular group and in its important group to understand. The other piece that we found for the kids who are victimized, what we're seeing is the responses that have been found associated with the social pain in other examples, but it's heightened for kids who are victimized. There's only one other study that's looked at kids who have experienced chronic social rejection, and this study is showing that kids who have a history of being chronically victimized show this heightened response in that particular area relative to kids who have not experienced victimization or to kids who engage in the defending. So there seems to be some preliminary evidence from this work that we've been doing that suggests that it's important to consider what's happening at the neural level. We have much work still to do, and we need to characterize and compare the connectivity of these brain networks to sort of further substantiate the work that we've been doing. And we also need to, we've collected DNA data, and we need to look at how those correlate and relate to some of these functions that we're finding. So I think it's an exciting new area. I think there's opportunities for new research in it that's going to, when it's linked to the behavioral characteristics of children, that might be helpful for us to further understand the phenomenon of peer victimization.
Thank you very much.
That's it.